This video is an introduction to active and passive voice. In this video, we will learn how to form the passive and consider why we would use them in academic writings. The main thing is to learn about the structure of English sentence. It's always verb, subject, and object. You find the subject at the first place and the verb, and then you see how the object moves at the end. So the first comes the subject, verb, and the object. Let's consider this example. The teacher showed a film. The teacher is the subject, verb showed in the past tense, and a film is an object. Consider the subject, verb, and object as the important part of English sentence SVO, the subject, verb, and the object. Let us now consider how all this changes, how the object moves from its place and takes the place of a subject and becomes the subject of the passive sentence, and how the subject of the active sentence becomes the agent, and the verb changed from active into passive voice. A film was shown by the teacher. Always remember that the subject and the verb forms the nuclear part of the sentence. Showed changes into was shown. Both are past tenses. Showed is the active and was shown is the passive tense. We do not change the tense, remember. Considering all this, we understand that the passive form is created by the pattern of helping verb and past participle. For example, you see again a film was shown by the teacher, or two films were shown by the teacher. Remember, students, if the subject is singular, the verb is singular. But if it is plural, the verb is plural. Was and were. Here comes concord, the subject-verb agreement. Let's consider this active sentence with two objects, direct and indirect object. The researchers gave specific information to the participants. The subject, the verb, and the direct object besides the indirect object. Specific information is the direct object of the verb gave, and the indirect object is to the participants. It all depends upon the writer or the speaker whether to use the passive or the active voice. If it is to be put in passive voice, specific information was given to the participants, or the participants were given specific information. It all depends upon your preferences, your choices. Let us now consider why passive. Most speakers have a difficulty in choosing whether to use active or a passive voice. But if you want to focus on the action itself, use passive. If you want to focus on the result of an action, you might probably prefer a passive voice. Consider this example. The free trade agreement between Australia and Indonesia has been announced by the foreign minister. Rather than saying that the foreign minister has announced a free trade agreement between Australia and Indonesia, because we want to emphasize a free trade agreement than the person who announced it. The number two of why we use passive is the fact that sometimes in certain cases the agent is obvious or not relevant or repetitive. For example, glass is classified as a solid. Who classifies them? Simply scientists classify glass as a solid. Lastly, we use passive when we want to avoid naming the agent. For example, women, because of their biological function as child bearers, were traditionally confined to the home. Rather than saying, men traditionally confined women to the home because of the female's biological function as child bearers. Now that we have considered the why passive part of our discussion, we use passive in our academic writings for experiments and for processes as well. You can take this example. The mixture is heated to 300 degrees. The writer can never say that he heats mixture or he heats the mixture to 300 degrees. He has to use the correct tense. You can pause the video and check out the passivization of all the tenses. Consider this example. The man was arrested, then he was detained in a cell for 3 hours before being released. We have no option but to use passive. Was arrested, was detained, and being released. Remember, in academic writings, apart from experiments and processes, we use it to introduce ideas. It begins with it. It is often suggested that, it is argued that, it has been argued that, and it has been said that. You will probably hear different opinions about the use of active and passive voice in academic contexts. Preferences can vary from discipline to discipline, and often from person to person. Certain types of texts use the passive more often than the other. Only pay attention to which is common in textbooks, magazines, newspapers, and the writings of experts. Also, remember this guiding principle. Make sure your choice of active and passive voice is intentional and deliberate, so that you know why you are using either active or a passive voice to emphasize information and make it clear to the readers. I wish you all the best. Stay home, stay safe.